What is up, guys, and welcome to another episode of Guarani Vision, the first ever podcast dedicated to Paraguayan football in English. As always, I'm Roberto Rojas, and joining me my two great co-hosts, Federico Perez and Ralph Hanna. And guys, it is the final episode of 2025. It's been a big year for Paraguayan football as a whole, a big year for us. We were able to do so many things and talk about so many topics. But alas, we have a couple more weeks before the end of 25 and heading into a big 2026, a World Cup year. It's hard to believe that we can finally say that after 16 years, but yes. Paraguay will be playing in the World Cup this time next year. And, a lot of things have been going on in Paraguayan football as a whole. We obviously saw a lot of, as big moments for a lot of teams, some sad moments for a lot of teams, some players breaking out, some players making their reputations made, and just a lot. So I think for today, we're going to recap a lot of what we've enjoyed in 2025, sort of a best of 2025 or awards or whatever that we can say and talk about it. But I guess I'll start with you, Ralph, to go actually. I guess from the first get-go is how do you assess 2025 for Paraguayan football? I mean, obviously all the talk was been made about Paraguay reaching the World Cup, which I think dominates the headlines out of anyway. But we saw Cerro winning, we saw Libertad winning. We saw a lot of players break through to like transfers and, obviously a lot of things going on from a sporting perspective, like Paraguay getting the Pan Am Games and obviously women's football increasing a lot in 2025. I think, yeah, just firstly to kick it off, how do you assess 2025 as a whole for Paraguay football?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, obviously there's been huge success at national team level because there is the men's senior team getting to the World Cup, but we talked before about the youth teams, right? We had the U17s playing World Cups in both men's and women's. We had the U20s. We saw as well in terms of women's football, Claudia Martinez breakthrough, which is going to be a generational talent. So there was a lot happening for Paraguay at the national team level, which I think was really positive. Then I suppose at the club level, it's been strange because it's kind of been, I would say, almost like a bit of transition because we have this whole issue with the stadiums all being renewed. So Olimpia doesn't have a stadium, Guarani, Luqueño, so some big teams don't have their stadiums, and so it's like almost been a bit strange for some of the, at the end of the season now with some of the big games, the title winning games that they're not being played at home or in front of big crowds because of what's going on there. And then we didn't really see I wouldn't say we saw a great performance in one of the international tournaments this year. We had the odd result, which was very good, but we didn't see a team make a deep run and kind of impress in the Libertadores Sudamericana. So you have like the two sides almost, right? You have the where the national team is doing really well after a long time, but then in the club side, it maybe wasn't as strong as we thought. And another point with that is if you look at the two tournaments, Apertura Clausura, the points totals weren't that high. We talked about this a bit last week, right? So there wasn't one team that was really dominating or really pushing everybody to try and get a high points total to win the title. So it's kind of a mixed thing, I'd say. Maybe great on the national team, and then maybe on the club side, we didn't see a classic year, let's say, compared to previous years.
Yeah, I mean, we saw droughts really broken, Fede. I think that's the first thing that comes to mind. A lot of droughts broken. Obviously, we saw, Paraguay qualifying for the World Cup. We saw the U teams performing well and qualifying two World Cups as well. Obviously, Cerro winning their first two titles in 4 years, I think, is one of the other big droughts out there. But yeah, I think that's my first impression of 2025, that it's been a year of, you know, droughts being broken. And I think, from a national team perspective, it's been, as high as it's been in a long time. But from the club level, yeah, it felt, I don't want to say bad. I don't want to say good either. So I'll use a different word, mediocre, that you felt. I mean, we had a really good race in the Clausura. I think we shouldn't disagree. We shouldn't argue against that. But yeah, it kind of feels mixed, especially when all the attention was really given to the national team. You would think, okay, maybe at the club scene you can get more, but I think the first thing has just been mixed, but also with droughts broken is my first impression of 25.
Interesting. Hi, Roberto. Hi, Rob. Hi to everyone listening to Guarani Vision. Great to be back, and especially for this recap of the best of the 2025 season. I'm with you guys, especially with Ralph. If we want to talk about the best of the year, with with the national team, no doubt about it. I think, the attention was there. They gave us the best moments of the year. And I'm with Roberto in the sense that, yeah, the local football wasn't the prettiest. It wasn't the most competitive, especially, and this is something that I hear a lot ever since I live here. When Olympia and Cerro are now fighting for it, the tournament's not good. Or the tournament's just different, because you don't have that many people in the stands. You don't have that back and forth every day with the big teams. And Olympia was never in it, guys. I mean, Olympia was never in it in the Apertura. They were never in it in the Clausura. They really had probably one of the worst years. Their fans want to forget it. But we're going to talk about the best teams. We're going to talk about the best players. We're going to talk about the teams that kind of surprised also in this season. And we're going to talk about our Paraguayans abroad also, because I feel like, they were the ones that really took the stage. We're going to be throwing several names out there that really had a very good year. But for me, it was the national team, guys. I mean, it was just us going back to the World Cup. It was seeing, the young guys also playing in the under 17th World Cup, which is something that now will be played every year, right? As the calendar has changed, so now we're gonna have more World Cups also. In that sense, that's something to look forward to. But definitely, 2026 is gonna be for the Albirroja. I think a lot of football fans here in Paraguay are going to be looking at their Christmas tree and hoping that there's an Albirroja jersey under there, because, it's going to be kind of that year, thinking about 2026. The World Cup is on the way, and everybody is thinking about what their team can do. Even you guys. I mean, we didn't say we were going to wear any Albirroja stuff, and you guys are all still wearing your Albirroja jerseys and your stuff. So it's great to be back for another one, Roberto, especially the last episode we're going to do this year. We're going to talk about the best that we saw in 2025 from the Paraguayan football.
Absolutely. And I think this conversation is going to be dominated by the national team, but I guess let's stick to the club team first, since that's kind of the maybe the less talk of it. But best club team. I mean, let's start with that. I think this should be unanimous for all three of us. I think it's Cerro Porteño, a team that honestly, when you look at the beginning of the year, you thought to yourself, how can they really fix themselves? They were still with Diego Martinez, they were in Copa Libertadores, but they also hadn't won in quite some time. You think to yourself, were they ever going to be back on track to actually win? Obviously, from the second year, they were pushing Libertad to the end, but they ended up losing by 5 points, 39 points on the day. Libertad winning with 44. Then the second year, it was a big roller coaster. Obviously, numerous managers, or Bava comes in, and then they win it with 46 points. They didn't do really that well in the Copa Libertadores. They finished in the round of 16, losing just a bit by Estudiantes de La Plata. And then obviously, Cerro Porteño, I think, bounced back from that by winning the Clausura, their first title in 4 years, winning the Supercopa, which is something they've never won, actually. And then they're finishing as the best team in all of the teams in the Copa de Primera, 85 points, two above the Guarani, 15 above Libertad, who are the Apertura champions. So I think, Fede, I'll go to you first on this one. I think it's really been the year of Cerro Porteño, which, again, it's been, like I said, it's been a long drought for them. I think they've been the best club, and rightly so, even when many people thought that they weren't going to do it because there was a lot of doubts. How can this team, what sort of identity? I think, really it's been sort of that. It's just been a sense of them coming in. And I do want to make a special shout out to Recoleta, them being promoted, finishing sixth of the year above teams like Olimpia. They'll be going to the Copa Sudamericana. I think they shouldn't be not recognized for it. They should definitely get their high praise. But yeah, I think in terms of the best team in all of Paraguay for the whole year, it's the Club from Barrio Vero.
I like what you did there, because you went with the obvious one. You went with Cerro Porteño, the team that pretty much fought against Libertad during the Apertura. They were pretty much the only one that could handle or do something against Libertad, which are the first champions of the year. And then during the Clausura, they were the team that took over, especially after the showdown they had with Guarani, right? Which was pretty much the third team, we could say, in the competitive world. And then you mentioned Deportivo Recoleta. We can mention several teams, actually, as to give them a special note or a special mention, because there were several teams that had, in certain points of the year, good moments, like Nacional, like Sportivo Trinidense. That was always a team that was up there in the top six, I would even say. Recoleta was another one. They really managed to put the big teams in uncomfortable places in their games, and they really hired really well. They went for good players on the market, and they ended up contributing very well to that Deportivo Recoleta. But going back to Cerro Porteño, I mean, it was revenge for them, right? I mean, this is something that they were talking about these last years of trying to get that championship, and I think for them it was just taking that weight off their shoulders after what happened last year and the way they ended the season in 2024. It feels totally different for them going on vacations in this 2025, just the way it ended with them winning the Supercopa, with them winning the Clausura, with them feeling like they were the best team in Paraguay, and they pretty much beat the best teams. They beat Olimpia in the Super Clásico. They beat Guarani. They ran away totally from Libertad, who never even had an opportunity in this clausura, the last champion. So, yeah, no doubt about it, Cerro Porteño was the team that knew how to do it, and they won the big games. I'm not convinced that this was the best champion that I've seen in the past 5, 10 years. No, very far away from that. But did have enough, and they managed to come together as a team, as a whole. I would even say, when I thought that, letting go of their coach in a moment that they were fighting for the title, I don't know if it was the best decision, but they ended up bringing a coach that now they're even thinking, okay, in 2026 we can do bigger things, because Jorge Baba took over, and you never felt the adjustment. You never felt like, okay, there's a new coach here. No, he came in and he just did his thing. He knew right away what he needed to do. He motivated the players, and the players did their thing, because everybody that you wanted to see contributions from, everybody contributed and everybody showed up in this team. So I think overall, no doubt about it, Cerro Porteño was the team of the year. Special mention to Sportivo Trinidense. That was probably my second best team there, a team that was always fighting for good points, especially at home. They were a really hard team to beat at home. But for me, yeah, Cerro Porteño, you got to give props to them, props to their fans, because they really had a fantastic year, Ralph.
Yeah, I think it's funny, right? Because if you put it on balance, Cerro and Libertad, they both won one title. Well, Cerro wins two because they got the Supercopa, but they both won the, Apertura Clausura, and they both got to the last 16 of the Copa Libertadores. So very, and then got knocked out by Argentinian side. So very similar year in a way. But I think it's the point that Roberto was making, that you had the Cerro had the pressure, right? The Libertad did not have. Cerro had this pressure to win the title. They had to do something. They had to react as well because they hadn't won the Apertura. And so that kind of gives you that almost like that extra lift over Libertad that was almost expected to win one of the titles, and they're often expected to win the Apertura because they have such a good squad on paper. So I can definitely see why we're pushing for Cerro, I think, as the overall champion if you're looking for your best club. And then, I mean, the on the other teams, just to mention, it's hard to find like a surprise package that had enough to be better than the team that was expected to win a title, because like General Caballero, of course, they won the Copa Paraguay, which is huge, but at the same time they got relegated. So that kind of dampens a little bit what was a historic win for them in the Copa. And then we saw teams like Trinidense played very well, Recoleta played well, but it was almost like they've surprised a bit in the short tournaments. But they haven't done something that made you think, oh wow, this was an incredible season, better than the champions. I mean, we should give a mention to Guarani, of course, because I think what Guarani did very well by getting through the group stage in the Sudamericana, which is now almost harder than Libertadores, the way it's set up. That was a really big achievement with such a young team, and with a team that at the same time they were trying to keep afloat, or keep fighting in the title race. It was just a shame the way, of course, Guarani ended up going out in that tournament. If you remember, they lose 5-0 to Universidad de Chile. So they again, they like showed these good moments, but then in the crunch, they didn't do the big thing that would have maybe said, "Oh, okay, this is the best performance we've had from a Paraguayan team this year." So I think ultimately it's Cerro, like Roberto picked up. They have the most titles because they won two, and then they had the overall points titles when you combine the 2 seasons. And the interesting thing now for Cerro is that we were just talking offline, right? That the sporting directors left, Weiner, and we talked last week about how they won that final game with just one player from the cantera, from the youth teams. So now it's like really interesting to see what are we going to do next year? Are we going to go back to lots of youth players? Are we going to try and bring in players because we know we've got money now? We're guaranteed Copa Libertadores group stage. We don't have renovations of our stadium like our rivals. So let's see what they do next year. I think that's going to be really exciting as well.
Yeah, it definitely will be. I think you have a lot of teams obviously trying to bounce themselves back in 2026. A lot of teams really trying to improve themselves moving forward. And yeah, I think it's going to be very interesting to see how all these clubs do and like, new administrations, new mindsets and whatnot. But yeah, I think we're in agreement that Cerro Porteño was the best team in all of 26, 25, maybe 26 as well, who knows. But yeah, I think it's going to be a very much an interesting year to see what happens to them as now we talk about Paraguay in terms of the national team. So before we go on to the national team and all those kind of things, we have to definitely talk about who's really impressed. And there's so many that you can go through. I think when it comes to the national team, it's been really a huge sort of boost for a lot of these players who have really had a really good 2025. And I'm not even talking on the national team level, also at the club level. So I'll go to Ralph first, actually. I'll put you on the spot. Who's been the best Paraguayan player abroad in 25? And again, there's so many players that you can choose, but just one that stood out to you. I already have my name, Fede. I'm sure you have yours as well, but just for you, who do you got?
Yeah, it's a good question because I think quite a few players had a bit of up and down, and because we're doing calendar year, of course, some of them moved as the seasons ended and they changed. But I think for me, the player they're really I was between two, and they're both in the Premier League, but I ended up with Omar Alderete because I just thought Alderete, he's for a long time been the most consistent Paraguayan player abroad in terms of minutes. He's just always been playing so many minutes when he was at Getafe, when he was in the Bundesliga. But he never really got his flowers because it was like, he's playing for teams that are fighting relegation. He comes to the Premier League, he has this big move. Again, it's a team that's meant to be fighting relegation, but actually they've had such a good start, and he's been part of that, a key part of that team. I think he doesn't play. He doesn't play in the first game, maybe, right? But then when he makes his debut, he has the assist, and so I mean, it's just been a really strong performance, and we haven't seen it from any Paraguayan player that I can remember that comes into the Premier League and first season is that consistent. Maybe Almiron, I can't remember, but for example, Enciso struggled. He had injuries. Diego Gomez wasn't a consistent starter at first. Diego Leon is not playing at the moment, so players have found it hard to make that step up, and Alderete has just come in. He has a very difficult task playing for a team that faces a lot of attacks. I mean, they're not a team that holds onto the ball, and he's not doing anything all game. So yeah, for me, it's been Alderete for that way he's come in, been so consistent, played well, and his team are playing well at the same time.
And it's on top of all his great performances for the national team as well. He's been kind of the stellar center back alongside with Gustavo Gomez. He also scored as well this year. He scored in the 1-0 win against Chile, that basically put Paraguay in position to qualify for the World Cup. And obviously, he likes to fight as well. That's also a big year for 25. He likes to fight when he got suspended against the US just last month. And hey, maybe he gets his rematch in June. Hopefully not in the most uh extreme circumstances, to say the least. Fede, Omar Lerez is a good shout. Do you agree, or is there someone else that caught your eye in 25 that deserves his flowers?
Well, Omar Alderete is a really good pick from Ralph. I'm totally on agreement with that one. Ever since I saw him playing in Germany and just the way that he carried himself, I knew he was in it for the long run in Europe, and he's really maintained himself. And that's been probably the hardest thing for Paraguayan players, right? I mean, stay in Europe, stay in the big leagues, and try to year by year get better and better. And Omar Alderete has really been able to do that. He's now a starter in the national team. Nobody's even asking for another player there. It's Gustavo Gomez and Omar Alderete. That's the way we're going into the World Cup, and it's just wonderful to see him play so consistently. For me, there was a certain player, a certain day. in the year 2025, I think it was September, not too long ago, that he scored 4 goals in just one game. And I can't get away from that. I mean, that's to me the best individual performance I've seen all year from a Paraguayan abroad. We've seen players that have had really good games. We've seen players that are captains of their teams, like Gustavo Gomez, for instance, in Palmeiras. He made it again to a Libertadores finals, guys. I mean, that's huge. Let's not forget about that. I mean, you can look at, the achievements and you can look at the way that individually they performed and what the task was at hand for them. For Diego Gomez in particular, it was winning the coach's confidence, it was winning the teammates over, and it was showing his stuff in this stage also, in the Premier League, in the big competitions in England, and he really did it. I mean, and I'm just not talking about this League Cup game where he scored a poker, where he scored 4 goals. I'm talking about, just him taking over and him being the player that we saw already in Miami, in Inter Miami, the player that we saw in Libertad, the player that we seen for moments in the national team already also, like that goal against Brazil. Probably one of the best goals I've seen in this qualifiers also. So I've really enjoyed, just seeing Diego Gomez evolve as a player. I've really enjoyed what he's brought to Brighton, even though obviously they're not fighting for a championship. They're not going to get probably a title for Diego Gomez. He's probably going to need to take one more step in his career to play in a bigger club or something. I even think, people are looking at him differently after what he's doing this season. But it might take him a while longer. I think the World Cup is going to be very important for him to even grow more as a player and to show his stuff to the world. So to me, it's not just about what he did in 2025. It's what comes in 2026 for him. I'm thinking about just how much he can grow still as a player, and he's one of the ones. He's one of the players that has me more excited as the Paraguayans, and he's been probably the one that I've been following the most this year. There were a lot of young players that also left the country at a certain moment. I was in it with Diego Leon. I wanted to see him play in Manchester United. Unfortunately, as of right now, we're ending the year thinking, okay, he might go on a loan or something like that. It's been really hard this year for the young players to stabilize themselves over there in Europe. That's why we're talking about Omar Alderete, Diego Gomez, that really made their path. And we're really excited for them next year just because of what they did in 2025. So my pick into this year is no doubt about it, Diego Gomez, Mr. Poker of the Year.
Yeah, I think we're gonna have to agree in terms of a Premier League angle. I think, we mentioned Omar Lerete, we mentioned Diego Gomez, those are the two guys that really stood out. Enciso had a really good loan spell, I guess you could say, at Ipswich, and he's trying to get himself back after surgery over there in Strasbourg. I think him bouncing back and trying to find his form has been really admirable for him because he's obviously going to be so vital for Paraguay at the World Cup. I think we can also mention some players that really joined this sort of radar. We saw Ronaldo Martinez win it with Platense. He's been a good goal scorer there in Argentina. I think he's gotten a lot of the flowers from there as well. Obviously you mentioned Orlando Gil as well, who's had a really good year and is starting to really build his form as the goalkeeper for San Lorenzo and maybe the starting goalkeeper for the national team. Is such a big debate as a whole about what's going to happen to him and his sort of future. There's so many players that you can go to, but I think we're going to stick it to the Premier League angle, Fede, and I'm going to also agree with you and say Diego Gomez was my player of 2025. I think what he's been able to do, and the good thing is that he's had the whole calendar year because you remember he joined Brighton this year in January, and it took him a while to get started. And I think, it was good to see him actually score on the final day of last season against Tottenham, the last Brighton goal of the season. And then, yeah, of course, he's been flourishing as a starter, you know, week in and week out playing for Fabian Hutzeler, which, obviously he's gotten a lot of praise from as well. Some kind of always difficult given what he's had to deal with Julio back in the day. But yeah, the 4 goals against Barnsley, the goals against Leeds, he's been really flourishing. And in a Brighton team that, they're there, they're competing. The league is it's so tight right now in the Premier League. You have them and Sunderland level on points. So it really could be Omar Lerete and Diego Gomez really fighting it out to see who can go to to Europe and who can go far. Obviously, you got the FA Cup next month, so that's another competition that both guys will be trying to play, and obviously for them, hopefully to win. But yeah, I think Diego Gomez's year has been just incredible. I think I don't think he'd been. I think it's incredible to see him really perform at the high level and doing so well, Ralph. I think we kind of really also expected it. Maybe there were some people that thought, oh, it should have been sooner, that he should have been the starter, but just sort of the adversity had to go in. Remember, he's the only South American player or Spanish speaking player on Brighton right now. It's a different Brighton side as opposed to the one that Graham Potter took over, or when Julio joined, or when Cherby took over when he got a lot of these South Americans flourishing. And now it's just Diego Gomez in a whole new environment and flourishing in that new environment as well.
Yeah, he's also doing very well because they're playing him maybe in I wouldn't say it's necessarily his best position because he's almost playing a bit deeper, right? To allow for players like Ruter to be more of the playmaker. And then when he does get his chance to play a bit higher up the pitch and be more of an eight, then that's when he scores 4 goals in the League Cup. But I think he's doing what we really wanted to see from Enciso, and Enciso never quite managed, was just to get those consistent minutes all the time. And the fact that he's a regular starter and getting those minutes is just kind of proof of how hard he must be working off the pitch, and also his adaptability to play in what isn't necessarily his best position. But he's so versatile anyway, right? That's part of the Diego Gomez charm, is that he can play in so many different positions. But the fact that he's doing that, I mean, it's testament to him. And like you say, it's totally different, the whole environment. Miami. He really struggled in Miami when he was away from his family for the first time. He left the country, but he was surrounded by South Americans, and Miami is basically Argentinian at the moment. The way they're doing everything, they have asados, they drink mate. So it wouldn't have been too much of a culture shock, but Brighton in January, now that's another story. And so the fact that he's just picked up from that and has managed to go on, and we're talking about him alongside Alderete, who's actually been in Europe for 7, 8 years now, I think. I can't remember exactly how long, but he's just picked up and managed to adapt to that so well. And so, yeah, I think these two are the guys that we're really looking at, Alderete and Gomez, also going into the World Cup. And just a quick shout out, though, one player I did want to mention as well is Cuas, right? Because Andres Cuas at national team has been so important, but he's done the same with Vancouver. And I mean, they got to the final of the MLS as well. They were just beaten by a really good Inter Miami side. But he was so key, and it was interesting. As soon as Thomas Muller got to Vancouver and they start, he really lifted their level. It was like him and Cuba so ended up linking up a lot and playing a lot because you could just see the quality levels and that kind of thing. So Andres Cuba is another player gets like a shout out from us.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it's been a big year for a lot of these Paraguayan players, and it was obviously really enforced with the World Cup qualifiers, which we saw Paraguay qualify for the first World Cup in 16 years. And 25 was a big year. We saw a lot of big results. We saw a lot of games and matches on all fronts. We saw qualifiers, we saw friendlies. We were fortunate enough to go to games, be it in Paraguay or in the United States or whatever. It's been a big year as that as well. So, I'll go to you, Fede, to join. There's been a lot of big games in 2025. What stood out to you out of all the Paraguayan games, and just the moments from what you saw in this year under Alfaro?
Oh, that was the hardest one for me, right? Coming into this episode because there were so many good moments, good feelings, in this 2025. I mean, I just mentioned one of them against Brazil, beating them at home. I mean, losing against them this year, but I mean, winning against them at home in 2024 was one of my highlights last year. So I was thinking about that game against Colombia, which was at the beginning of this year. Then we also beat Uruguay. We had that last win against Peru, which was something that was always hanging there. We could never win in Lima, right? But that was just to close it up. I mean, for me, it was that game against Colombia, guys. That goal from Julio Enciso against Colombia, that was probably one of the highlights of the year. That was probably the goal that got me off my couch. that got me jumping, that got me running all over the place because it was a really exciting goal and it was a typical signature goal from Julio Enciso. You know, those are the kind of plays you're waiting to see from him. And he wasn't 100% in that game. We know that now, right? We heard it after he played that he wanted to play no matter what, that he wanted to be there. And we saw the best Julio Enciso in that game because of the will to play, because of the will to carry his team and make it happen for them. It was a draw. We ended up drawing against Colombia, but Colombia for me is one of the best teams in South America. To draw against them in an away game when you need points, like we needed in that moment in the qualifiers, for me, it was huge. For me, that was a huge game. It was a testament to show the world where we're at right now. And that was at the beginning of the year. And I think that the team has evolved even more after the qualifiers. Now we're talking about friendlies, we're talking about the World Cup. But going back to that moment, that crunch time pressure against the team, you're against the ropes, and you need your stars to come through. And Julio Cecil came in the game and make the freaking difference. I love that from Julio. I want to see much more of that in the World Cup in 2026 in the United States. So hopefully he gets me off my couch more and more times because that was probably the highlight of the year for me. That goal against Colombia from outside of the box. Oh, it's just going on and on in my head as I'm thinking of what I saw in this 2025. What about you guys?
Ralph, I'll let you go first.
Yeah, I was between so it's interesting, right? Because the Ecuador game is when we actually qualify for the World Cup, but that was such a strange game. Partly it was 0-0, but also we knew we were going to qualify by that stage, and so I was thinking, where was the game where it was like really like now this is real? And I think it's probably the Uruguay game, that the home match before when Galasa scores the first goal of that game and Paraguay wins 2-0. So I was leaning towards that, but then the Colombia one, where Fede was saying that really got me because that game we really didn't want to lose that game, right? I think that was a key thing going into the match. And within a minute is like 1-0, and then within 15 minutes is 2-0. And Colombia are doing exactly what they did to us in the Copa America, that they were just too good. They were too good on the break, too quick. And it was like, oh, it was like almost a shock. It was like after the highs of beating Argentina, Brazil the year before, it was like, oh, maybe we're not that good after all, right? Has Alfaro got it wrong? Are we just having the same weaknesses? And so the second half and the way we adapted our play, but also the way we had the courage to get back into that game. Because you could have just said at that point, let's just keep the score down. We got, let's think about the next combo, that kind of stuff. That was really impressive. And then it's capped off by the Enciso goal, which is, again, it's like he's pretty much the only player on the team that can score that kind of goal. And to do it in Barranquilla, where we'd had the history of coming back to win as well, it was pretty cool. So I think, yeah, I'm between the Colombia and Uruguay games, but I think it's the Colombia game that really sticks out as a highlight. And because of that, the way we came back and the way we cap it off with the goal from Enciso.
Yeah, I really enjoyed that moment. I was really tempted on going with that just because of the moment that obviously them bouncing back and obviously the goal, great goal by Ciso, I think it should definitely deserves the high praise. So that was definitely a good moment. And being at the stadium for two games, well, three games this year really was really nice to see, even if one of them ended in a loss with the Paraguay USA game. Obviously seeing the game against Uruguay, where they won 2-0 goals from Galarza and Ciso from penalty, and then obviously Alderete scoring against Chile. It was really fun to be at those games. But I have to go for the moment that we qualified. You have to think to yourself, it was the moment they qualified. That has to be the biggest moment of it all. It's bigger than any goal that you saw, any big moment. I mean, the fact that you had so many people on the streets, the people celebrating, the fans, the players, this sort of euphoria of sort of everything that was building up and that was finally released after 16 long years of not being able to go. I think that is more bigger than anything. I would say, Fede, you had the fortune to be there in the stadium, so you have a better perspective than anyone in there. But I think that moment that they finally made it to the World Cup, even if the game was boring, even if there wasn't really a signature goal or whatever, I think the fact that they actually did it, I think trumps everything that we saw in 25, at least for me.
It was an endless party that night, guys. Yeah, no doubt about it. If I have to pick the night of the year, it was that night because people went all over the place. People went crazy. Nobody woke up the next day. Yeah, yeah. As I'm thinking about it, it was a very special moment, but the game wasn't good, right? I mean, I kind of wanted to beat Ecuador. I kind of wanted to be more of a going back and forth kind of game. It felt more like a friendly. Ecuador kind of just came in. Okay, we're already qualified. They came in very relaxed against their old coach, Gustavo Alfaro. The party was all set up, and we just needed a point, and we got it at home. And it all came to a reality as we heard that final whistle, just like you said, Roberto. It was a very special moment, like I've never seen, or like I haven't seen in many years. I saw a lot of people crying in a football stadium. I saw, the young kids with their grandparents, the generations also coming together. And it was probably a very special, beautiful moment to see everybody going out on the streets again to celebrate an achievement from their national team. Hopefully, we see that again in the World Cup that's coming up. But as of 2025, I'm with you. That was a very special moment. And just as I'm thinking, I mean, I'm getting goosebumps again because that was a beautiful night.
That's the best moment off the pitch, right? On the pitch is probably Enciso, but off the pitch was the kind of celebration in the stadium, and then it that spills out into the streets. And yeah, I mean, let's hope we get some of that next year because we already talked about how the games are so late at night in Paraguay, so people will probably be ready to head straight to party if we do something in those games against USA, Australia in the group stages.
Yeah, no, totally. I think it'll be a big party. It'll be even a bigger parties than what we saw all of 25. I think that's the cause for celebration. So I think ultimately, just to close this off, because really it's been sort of a joyous 2025, even at the club level, it wasn't the best. You didn't really see much in the Libertadores or the Sudamericana. I mean, obviously, special shout out to General Caballero winning the Copa Paraguay. I think if we have to pick a favorite club competition moment, is them winning. Guys, I think we're all in agreement, I guess, unless you guys think otherwise. Fede, Ralph, was there anything that stood out, or do you go for General Caballero winning their maiden Copa Paraguay?
That was a that was a shocker. I think nobody had it in their plans that General Caballero was going to be able to pull that one off, especially because of the way that they looked halfway through the season. Right, they were when the Apertura was over, you already felt like Temperatario and General Caballero were going to be the teams that were going to get relegated. So you were thinking, okay, the second half of the year, these teams are not going to compete. These teams are going to lose and lose, and it's just going to be out for them really quickly. And somehow they managed to get on their path again, just like Dos de Mayo did. Also, it had a lot to do with the fact of changing the coach, I would say, because that was, I think, the key factor and the decision that really made the difference in the second semester for both teams that ended up being the big surprise in Copa Paraguay. But that's what you get sometimes in these league cups, right? When everybody's distracted, thinking more about the clausura, thinking more about trying to get in an international cup for next year. And meanwhile, these small teams do have a good run in the Copa Paraguay, and that's what you just need: three good games from your team, and you get there. You get to the final. So for General Caballeros, it's good for them, but it doesn't feel like a complete. It doesn't feel like a complete year because they're back to intermediate and it's gonna be really hard for them to make their way back to first division. So I mean, it's just celebrating, but it only lasted that night. The day after, they were already back to reality and thinking what they can do in second division and come back.
Yeah, that I mean, it was a huge shock. But then in the cup this year, we had a couple of big shocks, and the one that stands out is Minga Guasu, right? The team from the east of the country that they knocked out two big teams, Rubio New and then Luqueño on penalties. I mean, that was a huge moment because it's essentially semi-pro, maybe not fully amateur, but you could say semi-pro players knocking out a team from Primera that put up a good team. So that was like one of the big shocks. But when I was thinking about like what was the moment or the moments for me, it was the Clásico, no? When Cerro came back from 2-0 down to win the Clásico. I mean, we hadn't seen those kind of performances. Like we've had some good Clásicos in recent years, and where we've had for the Olympia fans like the Richard Ortiz goals have come, including like an overhead kick at one point. But I don't think we've seen a team come from two down and then to win the game in the manner that Cerro did. So I was thinking of like a one-off game, I think, or moments. It was probably that comeback by Cerro because it was also in the biggest game of the year, right? The Clásico, regardless of what's going on in the league, the Clásico is always the big game in Paraguay. So I think, that Aliceda showing up and scoring the goal also came when Aliceda was under a lot of criticism at the time. He then brushed all that off because afterwards he played very well for the rest of the year. But I think that was one of the big moments of the year.
Certainly, it's been a good 2025. And before we close it out, we want to thank you guys. We want to thank you guys for always supporting us, always, giving us great comments throughout the year. Obviously, it's going to be a big year in 26 when we get a lot more attention because of the World Cup and anything else that's been going on. So we really appreciate your support. And also, a final shout out to you guys. Fede, Ralph, you guys have been amazing to work with all of the year to talk about Paraguayan football. All the highs, all the lows, all the fun things. It's been fun doing all this. And yeah, I hope in 26 we continue to go on and move forward. Hopefully it becomes also a big year for Paraguay. And hey, who knows? Maybe we all celebrate the biggest one of them all on July 15th at MetLife Stadium. We can all dream, I guess. But yeah, just to close it off, I want to send everyone a special Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and that I hope 2026 is one of the best years, if not the best year for Paraguayan football as a whole as we close out the final episode of 2025. For myself, Roberto Rojas, Fede Perez, and Ralph Hanna, thank you so much for listening in. See you in 26.
Happy holidays.